Same as the previous time. Let's wait for another 1 minute. So if you haven't done so, please go to the canvas and under lecture 02. Well, the slides is relatively less important today and for the next week. But please download the Excel file because I think the majority of the exercises and the information. Okay, let's get started. So hello, a very good morning. Again, appreciate for those of you who are coming in person in the morning session. As you may know, our Monday session has some weather issues. So today, I guess, kind of a special case. We have probably some of our classmates from the morning session joining over Zoom because that session has been canceled. So for those of you who are on Zoom, can you hear me? If you can type in the chat. I cannot guarantee I will see all of the questions and responses, but I will try monitoring every other minute. Can you monitoring the chat? There are less than 10 in the room. Can you hear me on Zoom? Okay. One positive response is enough. So let's get started. Today will be our second lecture, a brief review of what we covered in the first introductory lecture. We kind of go through the course logistics, the course information in terms of the content evaluation, an introductory lesson on what is business analytics, and all the related tools that we'll be using in this course. And specifically, we also briefly talk about some of the descriptive analytics, including the summary statistics, and very first few exercises to discuss. So today, before we start, let me go through something on Canvas. I already see that many of you have formed your team on Canvas with other people. For those of you who haven't, there's no rush. You have all the time until the end of week 4 to form your team and self-register under Canvas people student group. So yesterday, the department already announced that we will have 2 TAs for the course. I will be one responsible for 2 sessions. So by the end of week 4, I will ask the TA to formalize. This is a like student self-assigned. I will ask the TA to formalize the group by section. So the other sections we probably cannot join because I believe they can only be assigned by the course instructor for the TA. But do self-register over here. I see we have around 50 groups, and some of the group names are quite funny. Interesting. So if you haven't done so, please take some time. If you have difficulties, like I said last time, if you have any difficulties finding a roommate, you can either do so by joining the WeChat group. The group is full, I guess. If you still haven't found a teammate and you want to join the group, talk to me individually. Or alternatively, you can post a discussion, here in the comments, looking for a teammate. Or if you don't bother by the end of week 4, I'll ask you to randomly invite me. Do take a note, though, that for easy management purposes, you are supposed to group with only the classmates from the same section. So this is our Thursday morning session. So for all the groups meeting this session, you are supposed to share with classmates for this session only. Okay, take some time, but there's no rush. I will remind you again at the beginning of every lecture. So again, if you haven't done so, please go to File under Lecture 2, download the slide, as well as, more importantly, the Excel file, which contains all the exercises. So this will be similar for many of the future lectures that you can see the number of slides is actually quite only a few. So the slides is only supposed to be a very high-level overview of the topic that we're going to cover. But if you open the Excel file, for example, we will start with the formatting for the filtering, this Excel file. You will realize, okay, there's so much more content there. But first, we will go through the slides. So for today's lecture, we are going to dive deeper. If you think about the Excel-related content we were talking about last time, we have a very brief overview of some of the probability and protection in terms of the summary statistics, like the mean, the median, average, max, and mean, and the percentiles, the box plot, and stuff, and a little bit of data visualization. So in today's lecture, well, the good news is that there's relatively few or even no mathematics involved. Rather, I would be like, I want all of you to think yourselves as, instead of data analysts for this lecture only, probably think yourself as an artist. because we will be talking about something that's relatively subjective. If you compare to what we did last time, summary statistics, descriptive analytics. This time we are going to do some more subjective measures in terms of formatting, sorting, filtering, and eventually, if we have time, I will briefly talk about supervision. So those are the topics. Some of you might be already familiar with those basic operations in Excel, but many of others will not. So again, I will try to be very slow. If you have any questions, raise your hand. Use around yourself. So we will start with conditional formatting, and we will briefly talk about sorting, filtering, and I will introduce subfiltering in the middle. And after that, we will do sorting, which is another word for data. So the reason why I mentioned that think yourself as artist is because if you think about the topics that we mentioned today, formatting, sorting, filtering, the purpose are all subjective depending on what you want to do. Again, think of yourself as a data analyst, and you are facing a new data set, and you want to report. You want to generate some insight. You want to report to your boss or to your teammates. Last time we mentioned you can compress information and report only the summary statistics, the mean, the median, average. This time we'll try something a little bit different. We are not going to summarize the data in a way. Instead, we are going to try to visualize or report part of the data in different ways. So let me quickly go through the topics one by one, and then we will do the detailed exercises in the script. So the first one is conditional format. So what is that? So the ribbon is here. Later we will do this together. Conditional formatting, in an easy way, you can think of it as changing the look or changing the appearances of certain cells based on certain criteria that you set as a decision maker, so that they stand out. You do have a long list of cells, a long list of a data set, but you want to highlight part of the cell. For example, the cell with the highest value or the cell with the highest 10% in terms of the value. We will be able to do that. In that way, no matter if you are trying to understand the data set your own better, or you are reporting to someone else, then you can tell, okay, these are the top 10% in terms of the value, and I make them look different, so they stand out. They will catch the attention more easily. So again, it will apply only to the cells that have been selected and satisfy certain criteria. You may ask, what is the criteria? Well, that's the subjective part. You will need to decide. Of course, in the homework and in the exam, I will tell you explicitly what will be the criteria you want to set. But in your general future work and life, work and study, you will need to set what will be the criteria. Which are the cells that you are interested in, so that you want them to look different. So the place to find, for those of you who are beginners, the place to find the related operations of the ribbon and the functionality on the home conditional formatting. So let's quickly go through the other topics. I want to finish not one at a time, but go through all of them, and then we go through one by one in detail. After conditional formatting, sometimes we also need sorting. Sorting is to arrange the cells or arrange the data set according to a specific column or multiple columns in certain order. For example, if you have a numeric column, you may have the motivation or incentive to arrange the data set in an increasing or decreasing order. Or if you have a categorical column, a text column, sometimes you want to arrange data set alphabetically or in the reverse order. Or later we will see in the data set you may have a date column. Different columns may have different data types, and sometimes you want to arrange or sort the data set in a specific order so that your data will tell you a better story. It's more organized. So everything we are talking about for today's topic are for better presentation, better representation of the data, and for you to better understand and, of course, better for better conclusion. So if you want to find related functionalities between the data, there's a sort. So one heads up, for different versions of Excel, sometimes the button, the name, and the appearances of the buttons, the overall layout might be slightly different. For example, if you are a Mac user like me, later you will realize there are certain functionalities that might be different. So if that's the case, by default, we will stick to the Excel active on our university desktop. But if you realize, for example, in the previous years, later we will talk about formatting. I noticed that on MacBook, formatting has fewer functionalities. For example, you cannot adjust the font size or the color. So if that's the case, it's the case, because in the final exam, you will not be using the MacBook. You will be using the university desktop. So if you have multiple sorting criteria, it happens whenever that you are sorting, you are arranging the data set in a specific order, but sometimes there will be ties. Within a tie, it means that several observations have the same record for that specific column. Sometimes you will need a secondary sorting criteria for another column. We will go through this when you have multiple sorting criteria. We will need some similar, but more unknown. But they are at the same place under data. So filtering is also something similar. Sorting, if you think of human attention, limited attention, when taking a look at the data set, it's as if you are browsing the social media or if you are using Taobao. You only have limited attention that you are most interested, you can only pay attention to the first several items on the page. And this is sometimes why we do sorting, because we want to highlight those ones are maybe have the highest or the lowest values in the specific order. Filtering will do a similar job for you, but instead, it will only display, will only show within cells, the visible cells, according to a certain criteria. In other words, for all the observations that does not satisfy your criteria, those cells, those rows will be hidden. So this is filter. And then, if we have time in the end, I will briefly talk about visualization. But let's go to the first big Excel file first. It's called formatting setting. And here's it. Again, if you haven't done so, please go to Canvas, download the Excel file, and open it. So by default, if you open a very large Excel file, by large, I don't really mean by size, but it actually has quite a large number of spreadsheets. So let me teach you a trick first. If you have so many spreadsheets with relatively long names, you don't have to necessarily manually going back to the first one. Under the left bottom corner, you can right click. You have an overview of all the available active spreadsheets in this workbook. So this whole Excel file, we call it a workbook, and those individual tabs below that we will go through one by one are called spreadsheets. So we will start. This is sometimes we call it a navigate across all the spreadsheets, and we will start by the first one called data. So again, if you go to the left bottom corner and you right click with your mouse, and you can choose directly go to any of the spreadsheets you want. So within this workbook, we are going through all the topics from formatting to filtering. Essentially, all the three topics I will cover in this book. So let's go to data set. Any questions? Technical difficulties? You can let me know anytime. I will try to help. Okay, so this will be the data set that we will use for almost all the later exercises. That's from the title. It's a record describing a museum art form. If you still remember from the previous lecture, I mentioned several things when you first dealing with the data set, several things. So first, we should try to understand the concept of concept. What the data is about, what does each column mean, and whether we have completed data, how many observations. So I would say that the first question is well, more or less well answered, because first we know the background of this data set. So each observation is an art from a museum. Well, which museum we don't know, it didn't tell us. But we know what each feature represents. Telling from the label or the column name, roughly speaking, we know what they represent. And we do not have to worry about the units. So as a result, we do not require extra data dictionary to tell us any other information. And another thing I mentioned in the previous lecture is that if the data is arranged in a good format. By a standard format, I said, ideally, in the data set, each column should be an individual feature or individual variable. And each row should be an independent observation. And by this criteria, we are pretty happy. We're pretty happy. Because really, if we scroll down, there are 115 arts or art objects. 150 art objects, each consists of a single data point in the data set, and each column represents an individual observation. And then the next thing we want to know, and usually we explore and try to understand the data better, is the data type for each column. I briefly mentioned some of these commonly seen data types, like numerical. The column is a number, so that we can do some math calculations if we want. For example, the first column and the last column are both numerical. The first one is the ID or index, so we can do a simple count, right? How many? Sometimes this is also referred as a row number. It's optional. For a standard data set, we do not necessarily use it, but in many cases, having a row index or ID will simplify our result. The last column is also numerical, right? So if I go to home. So whenever you click on the given cell under the home section, it will show what is the current data. If you have a numerical column, it should either show general or number related. Sometimes it's numbers, sometimes it's currency, something. And you can see here we have other types that relatively less resolution. Sometimes you want to do conversion between one and half. If you have a very, very large number, sometimes for standard scientific purposes, you want to convert them to expression. So those are the two columns. This last column is numerical in terms of their pre-value. If you want to sell, they are problem. Let's suppose you want to sell. Roughly speaking, how much US dollars or Hong Kong dollars does it work? The remaining columns, many of them are text. So for example, the title of the painting potentially can be different for all the different art objects. So this one is general. Artist name is general. The date acquired, the format is date. So it's not text, but it's date. So in this format, we know is in the format of years, months, and days. So here I have to warn you that different versions of Excel, in terms of the date format, and especially different locations, different countries and regions, use the date format slightly different, in different ways. Well, I spent many years in the US. They always use the month and the day in a different order than what we do here. So that will cause some inconvenience. So if you work with data sets with dates, right, especially in different formats, pay attention to this. Later, in one of the exercises, we will encounter certain issues because the date formats are inconsistent. So we will see that. We will wait until later. And for the category, for the conditions, that's our first job to try to understand the data. For example, if a column represents different text, okay, we can roughly take a look. Those represent names or titles of the object. If a column represents a category, we can roughly see, okay, what are the possible categories? Same for the conditions and locations. So once we have our very first impression and very first understanding of the data set, then we can continue to whatever we need to do next, based on your goal, how to use it. So we will start with conditional format. But before that, this is kind of a spoiler. We will not talk about this lecture, but in future lectures, this will come in useful. So the current structure of this data set is called a structured range of data. So in Excel, when we're talking about this data set, usually we can present the data in two formats. One, the standard, or the default, or the common format, like the structured range of data. So they are written into individual cells. Each cell has its own observation. In contrast, we have a second format, which is called a table, Excel table, or data table, which we will see in next week or 2 weeks. Which has a different format, it's more structured, and they will be slightly different, but you can convert between the two. So we don't have to worry about it with this implementation. So let's start with the conditional formatting. So I directly tell you what we need to do. Essentially, in terms of this Excel exercises, sometimes I will tell you on the top of the spreadsheet what is the practice goal. And after you complete the exercise, in many cases, you can go to the next spreadsheet to check if your answer is correct. It will show the answer right up. And in many cases, I also have some other text box or even screenshots to explain to you the detailed stepwise operations on how to do this. So even if you are not following 100% during the lesson, after this, if you go through the Excel, you should be able to follow 60, 70% on your own. So going back to the conditional formatting, our goal here is to highlight the appraised value, highlight the column name that is above, strictly above the average appraised value. And we want all the conditional formatted cells to be in a specific format, red cell, white cell. So there are multiple ways to do it. If you are quite familiar with Excel, then you realize, okay, probably you can do something like using a heat or format heat. But here, using conditional formatting is quite straightforward. It does not involve using any function. So let's try to do it. Whenever you do formatting, the first thing to keep in mind is that we need to first select all the cells that we want to apply the new formatting rule. In this case, we need to select all these appraised values in this data set. Here, I put the short key we mentioned last time. Let's try to do this again. If you want to select all the observations in a single column, down to the very last row, the short key here will be Control-Shift and directional key. So for example, we select the first cell, the first value in the data set, and on your keyboard, just press Control-Shift downward key. By doing this, we are selecting all the appraised values in the data set. Similarly, if you go left, we'll select all the data sets. So this is a useful sort key, but only option. You can also choose to manually select this option. So the conditional formats, the labels, they take some time. This is a slightly different version of Excel. It's under Home, under Style. There's a button called Conditional Format. We're not going to cover or go through all the useful features of conditional formatting, and if you are interested, you can try. Some of the options are quite interesting. But the common goal of different formatting rules is to highlight certain cells in different ways so that it looks different and the cells might be of your own interest will stand out and catch your attention. So here, we specifically want certain cells to be in red cell, white bound. So we are going to define our new rule. So we will go to conditional formatting, a new rule. And a separate window will pop up, and we will specify our criteria. What are the cells that we want them to look different? So the requirement says we will highlight all the appraised value that's above, strictly above the average. So let's see which one fits our requirement. So value only above or below average. Again, the font size may look a bit small here on the screen, but on your own desktop, you should be able to see. So here, we are just taking to the above the average for the selected range. So what Excel will do is that internally, it will first compute the average value of all the selected cells you select. And then for all the values that are above this average, it will apply a different criteria as we specify. By default, they are all white cell select cells, but you will change it to red cell white cell. Okay, so let's click format. Red cell. With red selected, you will only do this. Font color is in the field on the top. So we will have something like this. So once you click OK, you realize, oh, okay, for all the values that are above the average, we do not even know what is the average. But nevertheless, Excel will help us identify which are the values that will be above the average. And if you compare with the results in the next spreadsheet, you can double check, okay, whether you are doing it correctly. Again, I'm not using the exact red color because I find this red color looks nicer than this. This one has such a high contrast. Not. Nevertheless, you can quickly compare. And in case that you do not quite follow, you can according to the text box as well as sometimes the screenshot. So let's go to the next spreadsheet and work on the next exercise. So what if we have more than 2 rules? Sometimes we want to apply multiple criteria at the same time. So let's take a closer look at this requirement. So first, we need to highlight the top 10 appraised values in this format, no fill, blue font. And after that, highlight any remaining appraised values that are above average. So it consists of 2 different rules. The second rule we already did the exact same thing in the previous exercise. But pay attention to how the requirement is being phrased, right? I highlight certain words. So here, the description really matters. How do we understand it? So in the first, it means that the first rule takes a higher priority. You should apply the first rule first. And then after that, highlight any remaining cells. So to some extent, we are formatting a top 10 value in this specific format, and we leave them as it is, as they are. We are not changing their appearance anymore. So let me slow down a little bit. We have 2 rules to be applied to all the appraised values, and there are 2 different appearances, and they are potentially conflicting with each other. And because of this description contains a word like after that, remaining, it means that after we apply the first set of rules to the top 10 values, we should not change the appearance of the formatting of the top 10 values anymore. If you don't get it, let's do it together to see what's the difference. When we have multiple rules, again, we need to first select all the values. So again, let's go to the first value, Control Shift down to select all the numbers. When we have multiple rules, it's not enough to define only one new rule. We will go to the last option to use the rule management. Under conditional formatting, management. So this will allow us to define multiple rules and, for example, specify their priority, which one comes first. So let's define the first rule, the top 10 appraised values, 10 types. So let's click on the new rule. Similarly, as the previous one, we are defining one rule as one. So here, what we want is this: format only top or bottom rank values. Specifically, we want the top 10. Top 10. Pay attention to this option. Sometimes we want the exact top 10 observation. Sometimes we want the relatively top 10%. They are not the same unless you have exactly 100 observations. So here we want the top 10 absolute value. So we choose top 10 without picking them. It's not top 10%. And we go to format, same as before. No field, blue font. So there's no field, that's blue. And the font color is blue. Select any blue color. So this will be our first rule of top 10. We are going to define another rule, right? After that, highlight any remaining appraised values above the average value. This is the old rule that we already did. So we just repeat a new rule and values above the average, right? Above the average, and it's red field, white font. So we go to format, red field, white. When you have multiple rules in the rule manager, it will have a list. And you can see the short description here, rule, bracket, applied in the order shown. What does it mean? It means when you have multiple rules to be applied, Excel will apply the rule in the top-down priority order. It will apply the first rule on the top first, and after that, it will apply whatever at the bottom. So to do that, sometimes we need to shuffle the order or change the order. We can manually do this by using this directional button to change the order. So in our case, our top 10 priority has a higher priority. We need to prioritize that rule, so we can put that on the top. So those are the two rules. If we directly click OK, we will see something like this. Something like this. Makes sense, right? For example, if this 52,000, this observation is top 10, and of course the top 10 is above the average, so both rules will be applying to that cell. So as a result, the cell will be a combination of the two rules. It will have no field and red field, so it looks like a red field. Blue font and white font, so it looks like a blue font. So as a result, it looks ugly. But more importantly, it does not satisfy our requirement. What does our requirement say? First, highlight the top 10, including this one, right? And after that, apply the second rule for any remaining value. Remaining means that we do not touch after applying the cell, the top 10, the rule for the top 10 cells. We do not change them anymore. It should only follow the first rule. So how do we achieve that? So if you go to the later spreadsheet, we do a solution. But let's directly do it. Let's go to the rule manager again. Manage. In the last column, there's a little option called stop list queue. What does it mean? It actually exactly means what we want, right? Again, I said Excel will execute the list of rules from the top to the bottom. After executing the first rule, we can choose if we take this little box. After applying the first rule, Excel will stop there for those cells satisfying the first rule as a criteria. And it will apply the remaining rules for all the remaining cells only. So this is what we mean by stop list. It means, you can think of Excel like a machine. It is a machine. So after applying the rule to the first set of cells, it will stop there. That cell has been frozen. We do not change them anymore. And for whatever remaining cells, we apply the remaining. If you have multiple rules and they are potentially conflicting in terms of the criteria, sometimes you need to pick the stop list tool to avoid any overlay on the formula. So let's see, after you click stop list tool, this is what we looks nice, very clean, also consistent with the description. We do something first, and we do something else for the remaining. So if you don't get it after the lecture, in the next spreadsheet, it will tell you, using the screenshot and sometimes with more explanation on how to do this. Any questions for the formatting? We only cover the general formatting rule. Also, it's not very interesting. It's not very exciting. Visually pleasant because we only try changing the field colors, changing the font colors. You can do potentially much more, changing the font size, even sometimes changing we tried it before, right? Using different colors, using different lengths of the bars to represent the values. Use different heights. Those are sometimes very, very interestingly. You can design them in a very interesting and eye-catching way, so that they are good for your recording cycle. So this is conditional format. Then let's briefly talk about the next topic, which is sorting. Sometimes we call arranging, sometimes we call ranking. You can see by default, this data set is sorted or is ranked according to the increase in archive, like from 1 to 150. But sometimes we want to sort according to some other cost. For example, what is the requirement? Exercise. We will later have the exercise. But if you click on any cell or any of the columns, if you want to sort, for example, we want to sort by the date applied. Date, like numerical values, is also something we can sort from the to the newest or vice versa. We go to the date column and we go to sort data. Under data, there's a panel called sort and filter. Those are the things that we will mention in the next hour. If you only have one column to sort for, things are very simple. So it's only from the smallest to the largest or the other way around, right? Alphabetically speaking, if you have text input, it's either alphabetically or the other way around. So you only need to choose one of the two buttons, from A to Z or from Z to A. A to Z means increasing. So if you click A to Z, it will start from the earliest stage possible in the increasing order to the latest. You can try applying the same thing for example, conditions. If you sort by condition, it will arrange all the observations in an alphabetical order in terms of the condition. Excellent starts with the letter E, so it's angel. And after E it's there. E to F, in alphabetical order. So here I want to highlight, using this exercise, I want to highlight. You may notice already. Previously, again, let's go back to the original state that we sorted by the art ID. I highlight two individual rows, art number 2 and art number 5. I apply conditional formatting, and I made them look different. They are in different colors as a row. One in yellow color, another in orange. After I apply whatever sorting I want, for example, sorting by title, with increase from A to B. After, this is the thing I want you to note. After I apply whatever sorting criteria and also filtering and whatever we do later, the format will go with the data. It does not go with the location in the cell, in the spreadsheet. So let me repeat. In other words, row 7 and row 10, I change their color. After sorting, well, the color is because we changed the order that we arranged the data. The format does not go with the location in the spreadsheet. The format goes with the function, with the data. So this is something maybe intuitive to many of you, but it's worth mentioning. So this means whatever formatting you do goes with the data. So that's why it makes it useful. Because if it's a relative location, it may change after you sort, so after you filter. So let's do a quick sorting exercise. So let's go to the next question and see what is the requirement. So for the sorting exercise, usually speaking, we start with a single column sorting. It's called a one-field sorting. We just click any one of the two buttons. If you have multiple criteria, for example, if you sort by condition, sometimes you have types, right? Many of the observations here have the condition of excellence. So within these condition of excellence, how do you order them? Right? Whenever you have ties, you probably need a secondary or even more sorting criteria. So if you have multiple columns to sort and you want to apply one by one, we call them multi-field. So this is a quick exercise that we will do together. The requirement says, okay, order the records A to Z alphabetically by title. So we can do that. But so this is a tricky requirement. Within B to A condition. So here, if I don't put the bracket and parentheses here, it may be confusing. So what does the word within mean? It means the opposite of like first do this and do this. So the word within actually means opposite. Within B to A actually means that we first do this B to A condition. And within this B to A condition, if we have any tie, then we apply the A to Z by title as a secondary sort. I will try to avoid such ambiguous or sometimes confusing descriptions in your future work and homework and exams. But for this example, you should be able to understand what does the word within. It means we apply whatever comes after B to A condition, and within that we have ties, we have a secondary set. So there's a particular order of primary first, secondary after. So let's try to do this together. Whenever you have multiple sorting criteria, we cannot use a single switch. So instead, we will click on the larger item of the sorting manager. Similar to the previous window, right? When we do formatting. Here we are defining multiple rules instead of formatting for sorting. So we can see the current sorting rule, how the current data is being displayed, is by increasing order of arc ID. Right? Instead, we want something different. We want the primary sort field to be B to A condition. So those are called levels in sorting rule. So we can delete the current level to forget about the arc ID. To make it empty, so no order for the data set at this moment. And we add in a new criteria, B to A condition and primary. So we manually select sort by condition, sort on values, and order is B to A. Right? That's our first one. And our secondary sorting field is, let's add another level, A to Z by title. So we select title and A to Z. Pretty straightforward. When we have, again, Excel will execute in the case of multiple rules from the top to the bottom. In other words, if you have a list of different rules, the top one always has a higher priority. With condition B to A, title A to Z. After that, you can see, okay, the condition will be B to A starts with P. And within P, it will arrange according to the title A to Z, A, B, C, R, E, something like that. But across different conditions, they are not relative. Within this title sorting happens only within the same condition. In other words, only when there's a tie. We don't know how to sort within the same condition. So that's why we are calling this condition a primary field, because that is a higher level criteria. And the titles are only, this title sorting only happens within specific conditions. So you can compare. After you are done with the sorting exercise, you can compare with the results. They are consistent with what you have. Here I want to briefly mention about something that is slightly beyond the scope of this exercise, but sometimes it's important. Right? If we take a look at this condition order, what order do we have? we have poor, we have good, we have fair, and we have excellent. That order is in the reverse alphabetical order. But we know this order is not in our preferred order, right? Because if you are describing a condition of the heart, the natural way to describe the order of condition would be excellent, then good. Then after good is fair. After fair is good, right? Because naturally speaking, fair is worse than good. Good means, okay, generally good condition. Fair means just social. So if we want to manually specify the sequence of certain features, certain categorical features, what should we do? Let me give you another example. If you have a column indicating the month of the year or the day of the week, the month of the year would be something like January, February, March. If you want to sort that column alphabetically, you will not get the order you want according to the month of the year. Ideally, we want January appear first, and then February after that, and then March, according to that specific order, not alphabetically. If that's what we want, how do we do it? So let me quickly show you. We can manually specify the order of a categorical vector. So we will go back to the sort manager. Instead of A to Z or Z to A or A to Z, those are alphabetical orders, we can manually specify. For example, the condition here is Z to A, but we say, okay, the order is not, we do not like it. We can specify under order, there's a custom list. So in other words, it does not necessarily need to be alphabetical order. We can set our own. So if we click custom list, you will be quite happy to see, okay, some of the questions I asked has already been solved here. If you are using the day of the week or month of the year, you can directly select it. Excel is trying to do again, consider it. But in our case, we need to manually specify the order of conditions, not in the alphabetical. Again, this is beyond the scope, and you don't have to follow me. But let me quickly show you how to do that in general. So we will manually type in that specific order we want, starting from excellent, and separate it by new rows. After excellent is good. After good is fair. After fair. So you see, I swapped the order of good and fair. So right now it's not alphabetical, but it's more consistent with our understanding that good should be better than fair. Excellent. So you can choose. You will have the freedom to choose in that specific order from good to bad, or in the reverse order from bad to good. So in other words, you have a sequence that is not alphabetically arranged, and you want to self-define it. You should be able to do that by manually typing in the order you want. So if we choose to sort according to that specific order, we know, okay, now it's excellent, then good, then fair, then good. So again, this is something that we can do. And you can quickly compare with the results. Of course, we are not asked to do so because in the requirement is that condition B to A. But if we realize it does not make sense, we can do something with it. Pause here a little bit. Any questions? Any difficulties? Anything? Well, sometimes I omit stuff. Sometimes I even make mistakes. So it would be nice if you correctly point it out to avoid any bigger confusion. So one particularly useful thing when we talk about sort is sometimes to do substance. So we will do that right after. So imagine, again, let's go back to the very original format of the data, which is sorted by art ID. Imagine I'm now your boss, and I give you a job to compute the average value or the appraised value for all the art, but by condition. In other words, I want to know what is the average value for the excellent condition work, art, and what is for good, what is for fair, and what is for good. Again, to achieve this task, there are multiple approaches. If you are very good with using formulas and functions, there must be certain functions out there that can complete the average. Means you will be able to do that. But again, for today's lecture, we are trying to avoid explicitly using functions. Instead, we will use the Excel prepared tool. This time it's called subtotal. So let's go to the subtotal. So again, our objective is clear. We are asked to compute the average appraised value for each condition category. If I ask you to compute the average appraised value for all the data sets, you know immediately what to do. You apply the average value to the whole column. But now I ask you to compute the average value for each condition. For example, for all the assets, for all the good work, and etc. So it is not straightforward without applying any new functions, how we can do that. So the next approach I'm going to teach you will combine sorting with a functionality in Excel called subtotal to do this. like very perspective. Like here, from different places. Everything sorry. I was using on my own Windows machine. It's a different version. Every time I prepare for this lecture, I cannot find it. I'll try. Yes, this one. I finally got it. Also, the reason probably sometimes even on your own machine, the layout may look a little bit different than mine because for teaching purposes, changing the resolution. Or sometimes the font size is much bigger from this screen, so your machine may look slightly different. Okay, let me briefly describe what we are going to do. We are going to first apply a sorting for the condition, and later we will know why. Right? To show you why this is necessary, sorting is necessary. Let's first do the applied subtotaling. So subtotaling is a relatively less commonly used technique in Excel for multiple reasons. So if we go to data, under data, on the right side, there's a range called outline, and there's a button called subtotal. We first use the right. We first click on any cell in the data set to let Excel know that we are in the data, we are selecting this data set. Then we go to outline, subtotal. You can see what subtotal will do for us. Like it will do at each change in certain variable. It will apply a function like sum or average or count or whatever. Right? So this is why we need to sort the data first. In other words, what the functionality subtotaling will do for us is that it will detect every time an observation or a column changes its value. So for example, here, if we look from the top to the bottom, we have excellent, excellent, we have a group, then we have excellent, excellent, we have another group, right? So subtotaling will detect each of such changes and will do a quick summary at each change. So if we do not sort the data, if we keep the data like this, in this order, and if we apply subtotaling by condition, we will do a subtotal for this observation, for this one, and for this. Let me quickly. So at each change in condition, that's what we want, right? Use the average. We want to average according to the condition of the free class. So if we directly, without sorting, apply the subtotaling, every time we have a change in condition in the data set, it will compute the average. So as a result, we will have so many different averages that it does not tell us anything new. So instead, that is the reason why we need to sort the data according to the condition first, so that all the observations with the same condition will belong together. So that every time the observation changes in condition, we know that another condition has been used. So that's good. So if you want to remove the subtotaling, you go to subtotal again and click remove. Because again, subtotaling will change the structure of the data. It will look a bit messier, but we can remove it. We go back to normal. So we first sort according to the condition. Let me just quickly do this. Condition, you can find it, right? From B to A, whatever it is. Condition value. Here you can see after we sort by condition, all the observations with the same condition will be together. It will not switch back and forth. So by doing subtotaling now, we can successfully compute the average value for all the observations within the condition. So let's do. After sorting by condition, alphabetically, reverse alphabetically, whatever, whichever way you like, we can apply subtotaling again. So let's go to data, outline, subtotal, same thing. So now we understand how it works, right? At each change in condition, it means that we are changing to another condition. So there is a place that we need to make a summary by computing the average values. We have 5 different values. Here we need average values of the frequency. Right? So condition, average, frequency. So after we click OK, this is what we get. Then we out a little. So again, as we described in the subtotal window, whenever a condition changes, it will do a quick summary of the quantity that you are trying to compute. In this case, it will compute the average of each value for the 4 condition group. Also the average for good, the average for fair, average for excellent, and overall average. Well, you may ask, what? It doesn't seem to be useful. So the useful thing about using subtotal is that it will change the structure of the data. Previously speaking, your data is unstructured. It consists of individual observations. But now your data has multiple levels according to the condition. You may also realize, okay, we have some new buttons appearing on the left side. If you click, you can try clicking on any of them, like 1, 2, 3. You will see what do I mean by structure. You will have different levels of granularity for the data. If you click 3, that is the more detailed display of the data. It will contain all the information, individual values, also the subtotal. If you click 2, it will only show the subtotal in terms of individual conditions. If you click 1, that's the highest level. It will only show you a single number of the grand average, which is the average value of all the conditions. Sometimes this could be useful. Sometimes. If you have any doubts, you can compare your results with the next expression, which is the result after this. Well, interestingly, I didn't want to mention this, but interestingly, for some reason that we don't know, the fair condition actually has a higher average appraised value for true. I'm not sure why that's the case, but as long as my own understanding, in English, actually, good should mean better than fair. But in terms of value, it's the other way around. So we don't care. Any questions? So again, let me warn you that if you want to do some other operations on the same data set, you probably should copy paste the data set to somewhere else, because as I said, once you apply the subtotal, it will change the structure. Because now you have actual rows, actual value. And the data is not anymore in the standard format of each row individual observation. It became like a hierarchical. So if you don't like it anymore, if you gather the information you need and you want to cancel the subtotaling, you can go back to that. You can go back to outline, subtotal, click finding cells, subtotal, and there's a button called remove all. This will remove all the small summaries, all the subtotal computations, and give you back your original data. So this is sorting. So as you see, sorting in many cases is useful alone, and it's also useful when combined together with subtotal. To give you a quick summary for each subcategory or subgroup of the data. Then let's quickly talk about filters. Right? We have to quickly recap. We have talked about different ways that we want to either highlight certain cells, distinguish certain cells, or display certain cells in specific orders. But sometimes you just have so much data. You have so many observations that you're just confused. So filtering will solve this problem by only displaying a subset of the data. You are not deleting any of the data, you are just hiding them. They are not visible anymore. You only specify the criteria and choose which are the cells to be visible, and all the remaining, all the other cells will become invisible, will become hidden. Right. So to do filter, the buttons are right next to sort. There is a tunnel shape with it. After we do filtering, usually speaking, we end up with less number of observations. So it looks cleaner, and it's easier for you to subtract information from the remaining subset. So I would personally argue that filtering, operational-wise, is much easier than formatting and sorting. Because if you think about it. Sorting is like when you have multiple sorting rules, or when you have multiple formatting rules, you need to worry about which rule do I apply first. But think about the case when you have multiple filtering rules. It doesn't matter the order of filtering rules. If you have multiple filtering rules, you apply them all together. If a cell does not satisfy any of the rules, you just type them. So in other words, the order of the rules or the priority of the filtering rules does not matter. So it turns out to be easier. We don't have to care about those rules and the ordering. So let's do this to give you a better, clear understanding of how the filter works. So let's see this simple exercise. Use the filter arrow to display only the records. Again, for filtering, we are going to specify either one or multiple filtering criteria so that only the observations satisfying those criteria will remain visible. All the others will be hidden. What are the criteria in this section? 3 criteria, 3 conditions. Located in the heat pavilion, so the location column. They are in good condition, so condition column, and acquired 2005. So again, if you click on anywhere of the data set, if your data set is in the standard format, click anywhere on the data set, then you click on the filter button. The data set will automatically be coming in the filtering mode. How to say? For each of the column name, there's a little button appearing in the bottom right corner. Let me zoom in. I mean by this one. So filtering is among the several topics we mentioned today, probably the most useful one, because you can, through the filtering window, you can have a quicker understanding of what the data is like, what the data looks like, especially for the categorical variables. For example, if you want to know, okay, how many different conditions are there in the data set, you simply click on the button of conditions. There's a drop-down list, and you can see, oh, okay, very quickly you realize we have 4 different conditions in the data set: excellent, fair, good, and good. And Excel is being very user interactive. If you want to display only the observations with excellent conditions, example, you just only pick excellent option, and you click OK. It will only show the excellent observation. How do you know a filter has been applied? How do you know that your data set displayed is not everything, but a selected subset? You observe by the row color. if from row to row there are certain cells to be hidden, not being displayed, filtered out, the row colors will become blue color as compared to the default dark gray. So you can compare before and after. We exactly select everything. This is the common row color of the row index. If you do a filter, let's see, with the full observations, you end up, of course, you end up with not a continuous counting of rows because certain rows, for example, from row number 6 to row number 58 are all hidden because they do not satisfy our full condition criteria. Also, the row color has been changed to blue, so you know some cells are hidden. So let's go back to the exercise, see what we should do. So again, filtering is straightforward because when we have multiple filtering criteria, it doesn't matter the order we apply to. You can think of asking, again, binary question, whether you satisfy my condition. If you are satisfied, okay, now you pass. If you do not satisfy, okay, I hide it. If we have multiple conditions, you need to satisfy all of them. So let's see what are the conditions. Located in the east pavilion, right? So we only select east pavilion, right? The west has been filtered out in the east pavilion. In group condition, in terms of condition, we are going to select 3 only. And acquired in 2005. So this is for the date acquired. You just manually. You can do unselect all and select all by clicking on the first button. Only in 2005. If you have more detailed requirement conditions in terms of the month, or even in terms of days, you know how to go deeper. Here in this exercise, we only focus on 2005. So we end up with only 4 observations. So if you compare with the filter results in the next spreadsheet, you end up with 4. So visually speaking, if a specific column has been applied to a specific filter, their appearance will look slightly different. If no filter is being applied, you will have a little button with a small triangular on it. If you have a filter, you will have another funnel icon. So if you compare the difference between this icon and this icon, you will immediately know, okay, now to display the data must satisfy certain conditions with the date applied. Similarly for the condition and similarly. So this is the result. Actually, when we talk about filtering, there are so many advanced parts. So many advanced. So for example, we can do a more advanced state filtering exercise. Let's go with the state filtering exercise. So here the requirement is that we are going to filter out any observations that will satisfy 2 conditions. Either condition will be fine. Either they are acquired before a certain date, or they are acquired after a certain date. If you apply the 2 rules at the same time, you will end up with nothing because they are mutually exclusive. Some art cannot be acquired both before a certain date and after a later date. Right. So here, in a logical expression, we do not have an and expression, we have an or expression. As long as the observation satisfies either of the conditions, we will filter, we will keep them in the filter. So in that case, what we should do, we do some advanced filter. So instead of a single filter you can just drag in by hand. We will click on the little funnel for advanced filter, little funnel with a little setting button. Advanced filter. So the list range will be the whole data set, so it's automatically selected, and the criteria. But let me first show you another way, because here we're only sorting by date. If we click on the drop-down list of dates, there are certain date filters that will be more advanced. If you do not want to manually select, for example, which year, which month, this applies also to some other numerical variables. We're just using dates here as an example. You can either manually choose the criteria you want, or sometimes there are more special cases. For example, you can choose only to keep before certain dates, after certain dates, only choose for next week, this week, today, tomorrow. There are certain pre-specified criteria you can select. Next year, this year. So if none of this satisfy our goal, we can only specify a custom field. Right. Here, what we need is either something before a certain date or something after another date. So this is not in the list, so we need to use a custom filter. So as far as I know, the limitation of this such custom filter is that it will only, at most, it will capture 2 conditions at once. If you have more than 3, probably we need to apply something else. We'll talk about that later. Well, it's already 22. That takes a 13-minute break. Let's try to come back around 35, and we continue. In the meantime, if you have any technical difficulties, any examples, talk to me. Either raise your hand, or you can come to the come up front. Also, for those of you who are in Zoom, if you have any questions, you can type in the chat.